Morning! See the groundhog?
Yeah?
Think it'll be an early spring.
Didn't we do this yesterday?
I don't know what you mean.
Don't mess with me, pork chop.
Stellaris Developer Diary 241 has dropped, and if you thought they were done with making changes to the open beta, well, you'd be dead wrong. So some great info in here about the Dev Clash, which is currently ongoing every Monday. I'm not actually going to cover that in this video because that's a lot of content, and really, if you want to read it, please go to the Developer Diary itself and check it out there. But needless to say, if you're not watching the Dev Clash, go out and watch it, it's great fun. Anyway, let's dive into the changelog and find out exactly what is going to be coming and what changes are being made to the open beta before we get the actual 3.3 release. First, Eladrin, who's written this dev diary today, wants to stress how much the open beta has been played. So apparently there have been 216,000 games played with the open beta since they've released it, and of course they've had a phenomenal amount of feedback from that, some of which they've taken into account during the first update, which we had a couple of weeks ago, and more adjustments are going to be coming before the actual 3.3 release. And I assume in the 3.3 release itself we may get some adjustments that they haven't talked about or shown us yet. The first changelog listed here in this developer diary is the changelog for the Unity Open Beta 3.3 that was changed just a couple of weeks ago. That was the first update. I'm not going to actually cover that one as I've already covered that in a previous video, so either go and check out that video, I'll link that into the description, or follow the link to the developer diary and read it there. Next up, we have what we are very interested in, and that is the changes and fixes that have been made based on the open beta and will be in the release to live. And these include, okay, well let's start at the beginning here. We're going to start with the balance changes. Edicts can now have a cooldown before they can be manually disabled, but are now cancelled if an empire cannot sustain the upkeep. This is fantastic news. There were some big concerns, I raised some of these concerns, big concerns about what would happen if an empire went into negative unity because they simply turned on all their edicts. Now, I believe that it was possible to get more benefit from turning on all the edicts and running negative unity production than in fact sticking to your unity cap and only having a couple of edicts. Yes, you'd get minus 20 stability and minus 100% governing ethics attraction, but let's say you were a pacifist and you already had big stability bonuses as well as an edict to further increase your stability. Well, it's not really going to bother you that much, especially when you can turn on every single edict available. But they have gotten rid of that. No longer will you be able to keep your edicts running if you cannot sustain the upkeep for them. I actually think this is, fantastic. Well done. Thank you, developers. AI megacorps should now spawn half as often as before. Now, I didn't actually realize that there was an issue with too many megacorps spawning in the game. Please let me know if you've experienced this. I mean, my experience has mainly been that if I try to play as a megacorp, almost all of my neighbors are going to be Gestalt Consciousness or megacorp themselves. But that's just a personal thing I had thought. Maybe not. Let me know in the comments section if you've also experienced an overabundance of megacorps in the game. This next one is a big one for a lot of players, and as far as I know, this is we can all thank Comrade Truck for a fantastic suggestion put forward to the developers here. I'm sure some other people might have suggested it as well, but the suggestion I know that came from Comrade Truck: leaders now only stay in the active pool for 1 year. That means you have to hire them quickly before they leave. But that also means that you only have to wait 12 months before all of your leaders will get recycled, and that means you can get new leader traits. They've reduced this from a 10-year recycling, and actually this is really good. No longer are people going to be having to spam buy leaders in order to get the traits they want. They can simply wait 12 months for another reshuffle. This is going to affect competitive multiplayer quite a bit. It's going to make it easier and less random to get the traits you want. And it's also going to make it easier for those of us that are role-playing to get leaders with some interesting traits that we want to have, whilst not necessarily having to constantly buy and fire leaders, because that can really break the immersion when you're having to kind of scum through and roll through all these leaders spending, it used to be energy, but now unity. Telepaths, that is the telepath job you get from the building, now give a plus 5% planetary output and get bonuses from planet administrator modifiers. That's a nice balance change. I am very much in favor of them making certain jobs, for instance, like telepath, any spiritualist related jobs better. We do need buffs to spiritualists. I'm going to a little bit later go through what I think some changes we still need to increase the competitiveness of spiritualists and also tall empires when we look at it from the perspective of the competition between tall and wide. Empire size effects on edicts, campaigns and ambitions now directly affects the base cost of these, so bonuses like the spiritualist ethics cost reduction and upkeep will be reduced by the full percentages. This is very useful. There's been a bit of an issue here with spiritualists where you get, for instance, minus 10% to your upkeep here, but that would only be 10% taken away from the, let's say, 50% added from Empire Sprawl, meaning the overall increase would be 40%. Instead now, it's going to be increased by 40%, and then that total should be reduced by 10%. They've also increased the spiritualist discount on edict cost and upkeep to minus 10% or minus 20%, which is doubled from the original minus 5 and minus 10%. Cutthroat politics will now also grant a minus 20% to edict upkeep. They have reduced the campaign costs and ambition costs significantly, and they have re-added edict cost reduction to spiritualists for unity ambitions and sacrifices. This is going to be quite useful. I think a lot of people have been complaining specifically that campaigns were far too costly. I mean, in the early game, you're not really going to have 30 to 50 energy just lying around to spend on a campaign to increase your, for instance, leader experience gain by 25%. It was totally not worth it, and it meant that players were never ever taking it. If you have options that are completely useless and a player never takes it, well, from a game design perspective, there's really not much point in having that option available in the game. So I'm really glad they are rebalancing the cost of campaigns based on community feedback. And if you're enjoying this video, please update the update of the updated like button. And trade value got a debuff, we know about that in the Unity open beta. Well, think again. They have removed the penalty to trade value from low habitability due to it not working properly with pops that were of a species other than the Empire founding species. This is very, very good for trade value. It means trade value is still fantastic. You can go out there, colonize a 0% habitability tomb world, fill it up to the brim with merchants, and then those merchants will be generating as much trade value as if they were on a Gaia world, meaning trade value has no problems with habitability. I do suspect, though, that this will in fact mean that we are still going to be getting a penalty to trade value from low habitability at some point in the future. This is definitely on the radar of the developers, and I suspect it's something they are actively trying to avoid, mitigate, reduce, disable, but so far it seems they've not quite managed it for technical reasons, and they probably plan to bring it in as soon as they can figure out how to implement it properly. Now, these are all changes. I believe they're going to be included in the live release. They're not in the open beta at the moment, these balance changes. There are more changes to come, but I'd just like to briefly cover some of the changes I think we are still missing. So, part of the point of this update was to make tall a viable playstyle versus wide. Now, what is tall and what is wide? Traditionally, the concept came, I'm going to say, from Civilization 5. Anyone want to correct me if I'm wrong there, but basically, when you had, and I can't remember what they were called now, but they were equivalent to traditions in Civ 5, you could choose to go wide or tall and have a few cities and a small presence on the map, or many cities and a large presence on the map. And each of these came with benefits and downsides, but generally speaking, tall could compete with wide. I mean, if I remember rightly, in the beginning, in the early game, tall was much better than wide, because it took a while for an empire or a civilization to get enough cities to really be wide. But that's where the concept originated from. Now, when we apply that to Stellaris, there is a lot of contention for what it exactly should mean. Now, I would contend that a tall empire in Stellaris is one with relatively few planets, but the population on those planets could be absolutely massive. They could be the biggest ecumenopoli in the universe, but that would still not make them wide, even though they had many pops. Wide, on the other hand, should be a large map presence, probably in terms of the number of planets. Now, I suspect that, and I put this poll up recently about void dwellers, and there is a lot of, well, I'm going to say a lot of disagreement on whether void dwellers would count as tall or as wide. I think they're somewhere in the middle here. Now, they do have a relatively small map presence, or they can have. You don't need to take many systems with void dwellers in order to build habitats on all of those systems. However, you end up with many planets or many colonies, because each habitat can only support probably somewhere in the region of 30 to 40 pops, where the planet can support in excess of 50 to 100 depending on the planet's size. This then, I would say, makes void dwellers something of a tall empire due to this high number of colonies. However, the current implementation of empire size mainly penalizes the number of pops that are in your empire. This means you're going to be getting higher tech costs, higher unity costs, or tradition costs, based on having a larger population. Yes, you also get increased from the number of colonies and the number of systems, but I really don't think the balance is there. I think we should have a far less increased in empire size from the number of pops in your empire, and far greater importance on the number of systems, and specifically the number of planets or colonies you have. And that should then mean, as a tall empire with, let's say, 3 or 4 planets, you have a very small empire size relative to an empire with, say, 10 to 15 planets that would traditionally, or at least in my opinion, be considered wide. I also think that the penalties or the effects from empire size still need to be increased quite a bit. I'd say 3 or 4 times the penalties we're currently getting, because at the moment, at say 1,000 empire size, you've probably got somewhere in the region of 700 pops, 7, maybe even 800 pops contributing to your empire size, but that's still only going to grant you a plus 100% to tech costs. Well, you can definitely get double the number of researchers at 1,000 empire size as opposed to 100 empire size. So yes, you will always get a benefit for getting larger, even though your empire size will increase and increase the cost of your technology and of your traditions. However, you will get diminishing returns on that increase in size, that additional population or planets or systems that you are bringing into your empire. But generally speaking, I think that's fine, because that means that a tall empire should then be able to compete technologically and in terms of unitary and traditions with a large empire, a wide empire. But at the moment, I really don't think the balance is there. Wide are completely stealing the show here. They are able to run roughshod over any empire that is smaller than them, because there is simply not a large enough increase to tech or tradition cost based on empire size yet. That's my opinion. I'm sure you might disagree with me in the comments down below. Please do, but I just wanted to raise what I thought the changes that we still need to see here if we want to get the effect, or if we want to get the change that the developers are aiming for, which is competitiveness between tall and wide. We've also got some AI changes coming. So the AI will no longer instantly buy every single slave pop on the slave market. Oh my goodness me. There has been, I don't remember the last time I was able to buy a slave on the slave market. Not that I would buy slaves. Slaves are wrong and all of that. Unless it made economic sense, possibly I could be convinced. Anyway, But that's not the point. The point is that the AI would consistently buy out every slave at the earliest opportunity, which basically meant you had about 1 to 2 ticks as soon as a slave appeared before, poof, they were gone again. AI empires are now more likely to pick Mind over Matter Ascension perk when it's available to them. AI empires are now much more likely to finish their Ascension path. The AI will no longer destroy superfluous buildings and districts during a temporary occupation of a planet. They've added AI budgeting for habitats. They have fixed the lithoid Tree of Life food building and destruction loop. They fixed an issue where the AI would not budget to use ship boost edict. They have life-seeded AIs now always want the World Shaper Ascension perk. They've updated the AI tradition tree selection to align better with the current state of the game. And the ship auto designer will now no longer add a nanite repair system module when the Empire does not have access to nanites, because of course that would entirely cripple your ability as an Empire to actually build ships. If you didn't have nanites but needed them for all of your ships, well, that was a big problem. With the UI, clicking the fleet size icon in the top bar now opens the fleet manager. That's pretty nice. They've also made stability fix. They fixed a crash that would occur if a timed modifier element in the expansion planner was hovered after the modifier expired. I mean, that's great news. Any stability or UI improvements I'm completely in favor of. Now, in the bug fixes, there are a couple of items that I would not describe as bug fixes. I would actually put them right into balance changes. And what are they? Well, first off, they have reduced Unity gain from the Trade League trade policy. That means I think they brought it in line with the regular trade policy, where they've actually reduced the Unity generated from that trade policy to be 0.125 Unity per 1 trade value. That is half the Unity generation we used to get. And this is a bit of a slap in the face for the Trade League. However, I think it is a warranted slap in the face because Trade League was wildly overpowered. And scientists assigned to research can now gain new traits. I'm not going to go through the rest of the bug fixes. If you're interested, check out the developer diary itself, but they've fixed lots and lots of things. They fixed, for instance, the citizen service soldiers, which didn't produce Unity, as I mentioned in the update. Well, they're now producing Unity. We don't yet have a date for the release of the 3.3 Unity update, or the Libra update. We really don't know when it's going to drop. These changes are coming to, as far as I know, they're coming to the live version when we finally go live. But as I say, they simply haven't told us when that will be. Now, I suspect maybe it's next week, maybe it's the week after. We really can't do anything except guess and keep a watchful eye. I am very happy that we have the custodian team. I'm very happy that Paradox are making improvements and changes to the game. Now, some of these changes are not improvements in my opinion and in the opinion of others, but overall, I am very happy that Stellaris is still a living game, that we are getting changes, updates, more DLC, more content, more of everything to it. Yes, every time we get one of these big updates, a certain section of the community feels completely despondent, and I do understand some of those feelings. It can be very frustrating when you feel like you've learned the game and then suddenly a few changes come in and it is very different. Now, I would say that the changes here are quite small overall in terms of playstyle. It is fundamentally the same game now as it was 3 or 4 patches ago. I don't think we're undergoing as big a change as we had when we lost the planetary tiles. Please have to pay respect to planetary tiles. I do still miss them and that entire little fun mini game we used to have. But needless to say, I am happy with what is going on. And I hope we get many more patches and many more updates to Stellaris in the months and years to come. I've been Montu. Thank you for watching.